Hey everyone, good afternoon. My name is Hala Taha, and today we're going to be talking about the power of cross-channel podcast campaigns. Quick intro before we get started. I'm the host of Young and Profiting Podcast. I'm also the CEO and founder of the IAB Media Podcast Network. It's a top business and self-improvement network with an award-winning social media and podcast production agency. This is a new era of podcasting. The world of podcasting is continually evolving and changing. Podcasts today are officially mainstream. Now, this may seem obvious, and it's something you probably already know, but what you may not know is that half of daily podcast listeners only started listening 2 years ago. That's right, 51% of daily podcast listeners only started 2 years ago. And in terms of the listener demographics of these new listeners, they're skewing younger. In fact, 2/3 of people who listen to podcasts ages 18 to 29 are listening to podcasts at least during the year, and half of them are listening to podcasts a few times a week. So listeners are skewing younger, and these younger listeners are doing most of the listening. And what you need to know about these new podcasters is that they're consuming podcasts differently. 64% of podcast newcomers prefer to consume podcasts with video available. And in terms of the top listening platforms for these new listeners, YouTube and Spotify is tied for first place, with YouTube taking 27% of the market share. And what's even more interesting is that this listener demographic, ages 18 to 29, they are the most active social media users. They account for 88% of social media usage. And so it's no surprise that consuming podcasts on social media is trending. And I don't just mean short snippets on social media. I'm talking about full pre-recorded and live episodes that get streamed across platforms like IG Live and LinkedIn Live. Furthermore, more and more social media influencers are taking to podcasts to deepen their relationship with their audience, as well as smart podcasters who are doubling down on social media and YouTube, knowing that it's the fastest way to grow their reach and that their podcast fans are listening across all the different apps. They understand that these channels are feeding into each other. And so let's call it. Today's podcasts are multi-channel and visual. They're being distributed across a hybrid model across audio apps, live streams, social media, and YouTube. They're no longer just audio only. The problem is that most advertisers are still treating podcasts in this way. So I'm gonna tell you guys a big but simple idea. Every channel in the podcast ecosystem has a unique role. And as savvy marketers, we've got to understand the strengths and the weaknesses of these channels. So in terms of audio app strengths, podcasts are really popular, and we're all here today because they're really great at brand recall as well as trust. 81% of podcast listeners say they trust host recommendations. And that's all great and fine, but the fact is there's more to the story, especially when we look at why people are tuning into podcasts. The top 3 reasons are to be entertained, multitask, and learn. And when it comes to these new podcast listeners, adults under the age of 30, they are primarily listening to podcasts to have something to listen to while doing something else. So if we dig deeper on this multitasking idea, BBC did a really interesting study where they scanned brains of podcast listeners while they were consuming podcasts. And that 94% of these participants were consuming podcasts while performing other tasks. And you might think that doing things like driving or cooking or cleaning while listening to a podcast would distract listeners from the podcast content and brand mentions, but it was the exact opposite. Multitasking actually elevates engagement with podcasts and brands. So this is great news. But the bad news is that this same active multitasking creates friction when it comes to getting listeners to take direct purchase actions when they're listening to an ad. So when it comes to podcasting, when people are driving, cooking, cleaning, and listening to a podcast, they're in the mode of doing that task. They're not in the mode of making purchase actions, like clicking and scrolling on the internet. Podcasts are really great at upper funnel effectiveness, so things like brand awareness and information seeking. And so a podcast listener listens to an ad, they're gonna remember the ad, they may search for it afterwards, and then hopefully down the line make a purchase. But the fact is, there are other podcast channels in the ecosystem that are more conducive for direct revenue directly after listening to a podcast ad that can capture listeners when they're in the mode most likely to buy. And this is where social media and cross-channel campaigns come in. And this is why we're extremely focused on this at IAB Media. So podcast fans are following their favorite podcast hosts on social media. 52% of US listeners follow the social media account of a podcast or its hosts. And when it comes to these adults under age 30, 65% of them are following their favorite podcast hosts. And so this got me pretty curious. I'm one of the biggest influencers on LinkedIn. I have 230,000 followers on that platform. And like many of the podcasters in the IAB Media Network, I'm a podcast influencer and a social media influencer. And so I decided to survey my audience. And I asked them, are you more likely to visit a brand site when you see an ad in a social media post or when you hear an ad in a podcast commercial? And 82% of my following said they're more likely to visit a brand site when they see an ad in a social media post. And when it came to the hundreds of comments when I was reading through them, they all said around the same thing. I chose social media because I'm already clicking and scrolling around. Or they may have said something like, I listen in the car, so the CTA is a bit tough to follow through on immediately. Or if I'm listening to something, I'm more likely to forget what the site was if I don't have access to check it out right then and there. In addition to all of that, I also found out that an overwhelming majority of my following prefers to learn about products and services on video as opposed to audio. Now, this presents a huge opportunity for advertisers because so many podcasts now are distributing their shows as a simulcast, meaning audio and YouTube, but very little advertisers are taking advantage. And these video ads can go beyond just embedded host-read ads. They can include things like video ads on IG Reels or video ads in a live stream, and we offer those types of things at IAB Media. Branded, co-created content and cross-channel promotions, in my opinion, is the future of podcast advertising. And to be clear about the definition of cross-channel promotions, essentially what this means is in a cohesive and complementary manner, promoting your brand across a podcaster's channel. And when you're able to position your brand across all of these different channels to the same listener base in a context outside of just audio only, you can drive purchase actions. And this is why we've totally embraced this strategy at IAB Media. So I'd love to walk you guys through some examples of what a cross-channel campaign looks like. We recently worked with Just Thrive, it's a probiotic company, and we conducted a CEO interview tour. We picked 6 podcasts in the IAB Media Network, all self-improvement shows with brand fit, and we interviewed Tina Anderson, the CEO and founder of Just Thrive. We promoted these episodes in an organic manner, meaning that Tina got the same promotion as a non-sponsored post, plus we layered on additional promotions like live stream replays, as well as educational social media posts. Once the episode was published, every single host conducted 3 mid-rolls, and we solicited the interview for people to take a listen, as well as endorse the product. We garnered millions of impressions for Just Thrive, and in terms of result, Beth Danko, head of partnership at Just Thrive, said she saw ROAS increase by 236% on average, and as much as 312% when host-read ads follow a founder interview. She also said it's been a recipe for their success and something they're doubling down on. Now, we've got so many examples to choose from, but one that really sums things up nicely is our upcoming campaign with the International Olympics Committee promoting their Young Leaders program. Panasonic is the sponsor of the Young Leaders program, and they wanted to promote the program leading up to the Paris Olympic Games. And so they reached out to us. They had conducted a similar promotion last year with an audio-only podcast, but they really wanted to turn it up a notch. So they contacted us. They chose my podcast, Young and Profiting, and a 3-part series. But this time, we're blowing it out of the water, doing it in a cross-channel way, promoting it across podcasts, YouTube, social media. We're going to spread the campaign out over 12 months. And we're also going to do a push right at the end leading up to the Olympics as final momentum where we're going to rebroadcast all the episodes. And so this is going to be a great campaign. We can't wait to see the results. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the presentation. I hope you learned more about cross-channel promotions. If anybody would like to work with the IAB Media Network on their next cross-channel promotion, we'd love to work with you. Thank you so much. We'll be in the partner pod. Don't be shy and say hi.